Hello and welcome to CenterMass TV. My name is Jake Zeke. Today we have a very special episode. We were able to get a really great friend and someone who is very knowledgeable in the gun and concealed carry scene. Second Amendment rights lawyer and attorney Mitch Vilos. All that and more. So stay tuned, and we're excited to talk to you tonight. All right. Again, my name is Jake Zeke, and welcome to CenterMass TV. It is a very special episode tonight. We're just going to be talking about gun control, concealed carry. We're specifically going to be talking about truckers and the 50 states, how those rules can affect you. We have Nick Moss with us, who is the CEO of CenterMass Recruiting and Staffing. He's very knowledgeable as far as the trucking industry. We also have Mitch Vilos, who is a attorney in gun law, personal injury. He's written a couple of books, one of those being Self-Defense Laws in All 50 States. And so he's very knowledgeable in this situation, especially for truckers who are facing violence in this day and age. And we just wanted to talk about this. We also have Megan on. She's just going to kind of be our third party, neutral with simple questions on the civilian side, as well as myself. So kicking this off, Mitch, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mitch Vilos. I'm a trial lawyer. My practice focuses on two specific areas. One is personal injury, accidents, done products liability, medical malpractice cases, etc. And that practice allowed me to get interested in and start participating in preservation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, and the right to keep bear arms and the right to self-defense. And so first thing I did was I wanted to make sure that my kids didn't violate any state laws. When we moved back to Utah, I started compiling gun laws in Utah. They were young teenagers at the time. I didn't want to make a mistake, get arrested, whatever. And I put together, after a while, I just compiled these laws so I know what they were. And the interesting thing for me was they weren't all in one place. You know, you had to dig for them in different places in the Utah code. But so I finally put together a book, Utah Gun Law. That's got our,
That'll work. I'm also going to have all of this linked as well as Mitch's website.
Reflecting off of it. It's got plastic cover this time around. But, and it was kind of interesting, after we thought about it, we saw some books that covered some national issues with laws related to firearms, but self-defense laws hadn't been covered. And I started getting cases right away relating to people charged with violating gun crimes. And the most serious ones related to an act of self-defense. You can be charged with brandishing, which is a high class misdemeanor, or aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, which is a lower class felony, of course, attempted murder, etc. And so concerned about law-abiding citizens who are typically law-abiding, who get into an incident, who don't realize what their limitations are, as Clint Eastwood used to say. Man's got to know his limitations. I talked to my son, who was just graduating from BYU Hawaii, where he majored in girls and surfing and guitar. He needed a job. So he started to put together the self-defense laws of other states. And I thought it was going to be easy. He thought it would be easy. And then we found out that a lot of states didn't even have self-defense laws. It was case law. And it made me wonder how in the heck a citizen is supposed to know what the laws of self-defense were if you had to read a bunch of law cases. So we hired a team of top BYU law school students that helped us research self-defense laws of all 50 states. And we published our first edition in 2010, and then our second edition in 2013. And since then, my practice in defending clients that have been charged with gun crimes, many of which are not based upon moral principles like, don't hurt somebody, but rather violating what we call a malum prohibitum crime based upon moral principles, like it's a crime just because the government says so. For example, it's not morally wrong to own a machine gun, but if you didn't register the machine gun, the federal government will try to fry you like a chicken gizzard on a hot, sticky Sunday night in the deep South. So, that's the kind of stuff I do, and it's very interesting work. And I tell the prosecutors that all of my clients are innocent, because if they're guilty at all, they're just guilty of a malum prohibitum. Translated into English, it's called Mickey Mouse crime, and they ought to be acquitted and allowed to go free.
So I want to kind of go back just a little bit here. You had mentioned a couple of key words, and I'm sure that most of the people that are going to be watching this and are going to be very familiar. But when you say brandishing, like brandishing, I could pick up my gun right now and show it on screen. That's not brandishing a weapon. That's showing a weapon. But if I'm using that in an intimidating manner towards someone, that's brandishing, correct?
Right.
Okay.
But, however, we are in the Salt Lake City is called the crossroads of the West.
Right.
Anybody that's afraid of guns, and thinks that somebody's being a little gruff when they're carrying a gun, sometimes these people get charged with brandishing because they look rough.
Yeah, but would that actually stick?
Well, not if I'm representing them.
Okay. There you go.
Will his number be posted in the comments, Jake?
I'm actually posting his full website, also a link to his book, Self-Defense Laws of All 50 States. That's going to be in the comments down below. That way everyone can look into this and read into this. But I'm really curious. One of the things, the reason that we wanted to bring you on, Mitch, this is a huge problem that's been happening in trucking, and it's really not being addressed. Over the last 24 months or so, you can clearly see a spike in trucking-related violence, and that's usually violence towards truckers. That's almost every day I see something where a trucker's been shot, a trucker died in an aggravated assault. There's all sorts of things going on, and I see the individual stories, but nobody's really compiled that. And then recently in North Carolina, legislation was introduced to actually loosen restrictions on CDLA truck drivers to concealed carry across state lines. Now, I know that legislation isn't something you're probably super familiar with, but do you see a legislation like that passing for truckers? So do you see anything like that in the current administration actually going through?
In the current administration? maybe if we get smart and I know that this is politically incorrect, but vote in a Republican president again with a Republican Congress, we will probably see United States wide concealed carry, each state recognizing the other's permit, and that would solve the problem. As long as the trucker had a permit. Now, a lot of people don't like to get a permit because they don't want the government, that's spelled GUMMIT, to know that they have firearms.
But, you speak trucker.
yeah. So, but I could comment on what you said about the injuries increasing, it seems like. And this...
We lost you there for just a second, Mitch.
Peeve of mine. It's a pet peeve. You want me to just unload on your blog here? You want me to unload?
Absolutely. I love it. This is what we're here for.
Yeah. In my humble opinion, gun-free zones, including your truck cab, is a negligent or grossly negligent policy. it actually, I think, encourages crime. It's why people will knock off a 7-Eleven store. They know that the employees aren't allowed to defend themselves. It's against company policy to have a firearm in a Walmart. It's a lot of churches and schools have gun-free zones. And so where do people attack if they want to cause as much catastrophe as possible? The gun-free zone, where no one has the right to defend themselves. And I think we're seeing that. We see that in the schools all the time. Utah's had teachers, armed teachers, since 1997, and we've never had an injury to a student or a coworker in 24 years now. It's a safe policy, but we also haven't had a mass killing in a school zone. Okay. Our teachers are armed, and in some schools, there's dozens that are armed. So, and you'll see that, I think there's a movement now among law-abiding citizens. That's why we have all these guns selling this year. People are concerned about their safety, and they realize that the police won't always be there to protect them. And so they arm themselves. And we've had, I don't know, several million new gun buyers, people who've never owned a firearm before, now buying a gun. So, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's fair.
Country song goes.
Well,
Truckers listen to country music, don't they?
I think most of them probably. Let's Nick, I want to ask you, you have experience on the carrier side of things, not necessarily in the cab, but on the carrier side of things. And you've seen policies that have affected truckers in negative ways and in positive ways. What's your personal, do you have a personal thought on gun control for carriers and gun-free cabs?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to agreeing what Mitch just said. And I'm not a student of the law by any means, but infringing on one's personal right to protect themselves. They think that a lot of people think that's just the homes, protect your home and household, and that stuff. But for a lot of truck drivers, their home is their truck cab. They spend 240 nights on average away from home a year, and they live in that truck. And a lot of drivers do it anyway, even though, it's illegal to cross state lines and this, that, and the other. And additionally, on top of that, most trucking companies have it in their company policy that they're not to have a weapon inside their truck. In fact, some, if not most, trucking companies have a policy against the length of a blade that they can have in their truck to defend themselves. And so, let's just suppose for a minute, if you will, that a law like Mitch was just speaking about passed. Trucking companies they don't have to change their policy just because a federal law or state law has changed that says truckers can't carry it. They can still say, hey, can't have it to work for our company. And so, I would caution truck drivers if laws like this do pass to do that, because at that point they get stopped at a DOT check and it gets put on one of the reports that they, had a weapon in their truck. That goes back to the safety department. Bam, they're terminated for violating company policy. And it makes them hard to get hired somewhere else when they were terminated from the last position, as you know, Jake.
For company policies, especially company policy.
Especially. Yeah. And so it's unfortunate because and just going back to what I said, in my opinion, that's the truck driver's home. They live there. There's some drivers that don't go home for over a year. They'll just stay out in their truck, make their money, and then they'll come home and visit family because they don't have a home. That truck, they literally live in their truck. That's just kind of the nature of the business. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So, in the past, we've seen things like unions such as Teamsters. We've seen trucker advocacy groups, and they've actually pushed and been able to change laws. Most recently, they were able to change federal regulation, as far as vaccines and being considered essential workers. Do you think trucker advocacy groups could have an effect on the carriers actually changing that? Or do you think that the mega carriers are just going to just completely abolish this whole gun policy no matter what and continue to be a gun-free zone or a gun-free carrier? Why do you think these carriers are gun-free anyway, like in the first place?
I'm not a safety guy by nature. I'm a recruiter by nature. But I know a lot of safety guys. And I think they just think it's risk. I'm going to assume here that that's what it is. They think it's just risky to have a driver with a weapon in case there's an altercation. That trucking company's name and brand gets on the news. It gets involved in a lawsuit with guys like Mitch, and they just don't want to have any skin in that game. Trucking is a lawsuit happy industry anyways. People sue other companies and carriers and over anything now as it is. There's class action lawsuits daily going out. There's, just all kinds of stuff. And so anything that could potentially harm that company for any safety type of reason, yeah, I think the trucking company is always going to avoid that.
Huh. And so, I mean, going back to Mitch on this, so hearing, company policy and things like that, obviously company policy in this particular case can trump state law. Is there any sort of federal or state law that can trump a company policy? Is there anything out there?
Well, they usually there's some respect on the part of the legislatures, is what I've seen, to allow private businesses to run their own company. And there's some wisdom to that. But there's ways to protect the employer from liability. Utah's done something that's very wise, I think, as it relates to property owners. We have a law that says if a property owner allows people who have concealed weapons permits on the premises, the property owner is immune from civil liability. So it's better for that property owner to allow concealed weapon permit holders on the property than to exclude them, because they're protected. They're immune from a lawsuit.
Wow.
The other thing we have is like if someone were to try to rob a trucker and the trucker were to shoot the robber, we have a law in the books here in Utah that says that if you are committing any crime that's related to your injury, being ventilated by a 45 caliber instrument, ventilated, or what's the other, aerated, that if you're committing a crime, neither you nor your heirs, if you die, can bring a lawsuit.
Really?
Against the person that shot you.
See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so there's things that can be done to take away the incentive to rob or to commit violence against truckers.
Mm-hmm.
The states have to do that, and I don't imagine that too many blue states are going to be inclined to do that. But the smart states, that really care about their citizens, will protect the innocent. The innocent should be protected, and the criminal should bear the risk of serious injury or death in any situation where there's potential conflict between the two of them. The burden or the risk of dying should always lie with the culpable party.
Perfect.
How's
that? I mean,
a good public policy.
I don't disagree in any way, shape, or form. Me and Mitch have had a couple of long conversations specifically about concealed carry, and most recently today we kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit. But I'm more on the libertarian side. I'm kind of in the middle, where people govern themselves, smaller government, not as much oversight. But I also don't believe that everybody should just be running rampant in total anarchy. I think there should be rules and regulations. Like, one specific rule that I don't agree with is I don't agree that 18-year-olds should be able to conceal carry. I don't think they should be able to drive a big rig. I don't think they should be able to do that. When I was 18,
let me ask you this, Jake, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
No.
At 18 years old, I was deployed to a war zone.
Same.
Not only allowed to carry a weapon, and at 19, I was leading troops carrying weapons. So, I kind of disagree. I think there should be a vetting process, and a lot of states in trucking right now are, just going back to your other point, they're vetting out the possibility of letting 18-year-olds drive trucks.
18 to 21-year-olds. Yeah, I know that's happening right now. But
I disagree with that.
I don't personally. When I was 18, if I wasn't in a military situation, in the situations that I was in, carrying a weapon, I don't think I would have been fully responsible enough, and I didn't think I have the maturity enough to actually handle myself in that aptitude. when we hear about crimes that happen, even in the military, when we hear about mistakes that are made involving weapons and things like that, it's mostly younger troops. I mean, there's no denying that those kind of things happen. When we see the most suicides are between 18 and 35.
Well,
Most
you
of that
also
being
have to
between
look at
18
the
and 22.
numbers. You also have to look at the numbers. So
Oh
who
yeah,
makes up a majority of the military? 18 to 25 year
18 to
olds. So
25-year-olds.
that
Agreed.
makes up a bulk of the military. So the accidents are obviously going to be higher than
Yes.
people in their 30s. But I disagree with that. At 10 years old, I grew up on a farm. At 10 years old, I was running around on my four-wheel with a shotgun, in the field shooting rabbits by myself. I didn't even
Same.
have to have permission to get out of the gun case. So I think it needs to be taken on a case by case basis. That's just my opinion. I
Now,
mean,
I agree with
I don't
open
make
carry.
law. I don't write law.
Right.
So
I agree with open carry. So if you're 18 and you want to open carry a weapon, absolutely. I believe you should be able to do that. But concealed carry is where I have an issue with it.
Well,
And
you
it's
know,
mostly because of the world we live in now and the way that people are acting. I'll see if I can find it really quickly. There's actually a YouTube video of an 18-year-old going on a field trip. It was a senior field trip to a police academy SWAT training VR environment. And the VR environment that they played there was a lady committing suicide. Lady pulls out a gun, and you hear gun, 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 and the kid just shoots her right there. No qualms, no questions. And the problem that I have with that is there's a separation from reality with a lot of the current generation that's coming up right now that are turning 18, 19. There is a separation of reality when it comes to growing up in a virtual environment and then going into real life. And so at our age, I absolutely agree that we probably would have been fine. I carried a 22. I went out hunting. I would go out for weekends on my own at 15 and 16 years old. And I carried a rifle in my truck my senior year of high school. I think I was probably one of the last generations to be able to, last age groups to be able to do that. I literally had a rifle in the back of my truck in Jacksboro, Texas. That's how it was when I grew up, and especially in a rural Texas environment. But now there's too much of that separation of reality, and I don't agree that 18-year-olds in this day and age are mature enough to handle that type of responsibility. And I put that also into driving a large truck. I think there's too much distraction. I think there's too much opportunity for distraction, and I think it's a bad idea. And that's just a personal opinion, and that's just one side of it. I know that there's different elements and different perceptions of this, but that's my personal opinion on it. I can have a gun literally right next to me right now. I've got it on a fingerprint. All I got to do is click, and it's here. It's that simple. And so I believe in guns. I believe in the ability to carry them. I believe in the right to bear arms, but I believe that there's a certain responsibility in concealed carry that an 18-year-old doesn't have. That's my opinion.
can I make an interesting observation?
Absolutely.
If you look at the federal statutes
Mhm.
relating to citizens of the United States, an important part of our national defense is armed citizens
Correct.
that are not part of the National Guard. The National Guard is the organized militia. The unorganized militia, by federal statute, consists of 17-year-old to 45-year-old citizens who are not part of the military. And the U.S. Army has been mandated to sell used semi-automatic, that's assault weapons, that are much more powerful than AR-15s
Right.
and AK-47s to this group of citizens between the ages of 17 and 45. Of course, a lot of state laws. Now, Florida passed a law that said they're not going to sell guns to anyone under 21.
Mhm.
Frankly, I think that's a mistake for some of the reasons that you stated, Jake. Because a lot of kids that grow up on a farm or whatever, those people are responsible enough.
Yes.
I'll tell you another thing too. In Utah, we have a provisional concealed carry permit that allows 18-year-olds to carry a concealed firearm
Yes.
from 18 through 2021. And as far as I know, we haven't had any incidents involving those that have the permit.
Wow. See, I didn't know that was actually in place.
So, that's a pretty good safety record.
Yeah, that is.
Well, going back to what you said, Mitch, too, I think the founding fathers, when they created the Second Amendment, I think their whole purpose was, yeah, people need to protect themselves, but I also think a fundamental thing that goes into the Second Amendment is for protection against a tyrannical government. That what happened in the late 1700s, if it needed to happen again, the citizens, if the government got too powerful, they wouldn't be caught with their pants down, lack of better words. And so, again, I go back to agreeing with you. What you said, I don't think there should be an age restriction. I think if there's a kid that's on antipsychotic medication or he's got problems and it's notated by a doctor, yeah, let's keep weapons out of that person's hand. But when they're 18, they get charged like an adult. They should have all the rights and regulations to be an adult. And there's a lot of 18-year-old. I wouldn't say a lot anymore. A lot of kids stay at home now till they're 25, but there's still a lot of kids that go off to college or move out on their own into the trades, and they live on their own. They should have the right to protect themselves too.
I mean, I don't agree. I'm sorry. I don't disagree. Like I said, my biggest qualm, and also that's something that I did not know that Mitch brought up to me. I didn't know that provisional law actually went into effect already. I did not know that we've gone almost a year under that. And so that is an interesting stat to look at. But I also kind of look at Utah's gun culture as a whole. I mean, aren't we probably one of the easiest states to get a gun in? I mean, I'm from Texas, and it's easier to get a gun
Outside
in
of Alaska, I'd say we're in the top 10. I would
yeah.
assume.
We're basically the easiest place to purchase it. And so our gun culture is very different. I mean, there's ranges in every city and every city in between. I mean, there's a range in Layton, there's a range in Syracuse, there's a range in Centerville, there's a range in Farmington. And for those of you that don't know, those are very, very close cities. Those are like suburbs of one city. And so guns are a part of the culture here, heavily a part of the culture here. But then we look at other places where guns are a part of the culture in the wrong ways. And I know it's kind of cliche to point towards it, but let's point towards Chicago. Let's point towards, the 15 to 18-year-old gang-related gun violence that happens there, and the excessive amount of gun violence that happens there. And that is a gun-controlled city, a gun-controlled area, and it's so heavy at that point. I don't think it has to do with the actual regulation. I think it has to do with the culture that is surrounding that specific area. Tell me I'm wrong, but gangbangers aren't going to, if you change the laws there, it's not going to change the fact that they're going to still be shooting each other. And
shooting each other in the 50s with zip guns. You make it out CO2, or let's see, it's
stricter gun laws don't make it harder to buy.
No, they don't. What I'm saying is there's a culture. I think there's a cultural stance that has a huge impact on how gun violence happens, and it depends on what area you're in. And so I think using Utah as a basis for, hey, we don't have any gun problems. I mean, we do have some gun problems, but we don't have 18-year-olds running rampant and causing any incidents, doesn't mean that the rest of the nation is in the same culturally identified state as we are. And so, like, I wouldn't support that in New York. I wouldn't support that in California. I wouldn't support that in some inner cities in Texas, Dallas and Houston. Very, very firm examples of that. And so, while I agree, I 100% agree with the right to carry right to bear arms. I just don't believe that. I still stand by it. I don't think 18 is a good age to be able to conceal carry. Open carry, fine. Have one in your car, fine. But concealed carry on your person at any given time, I don't think 18 is a good age. I just don't. I can't get behind that. Especially knowing, I have an 11-year-old son, who's having trouble separating fiction from reality when it comes to gaming, and I see it on a first-hand basis. And then I hear the kids that he's playing with who are around the 17, 18-year-old mark, because they're all playing video games right now because of the pandemic. And their views and their attitudes toward people, and their lack of respect and their lack of just common courtesy and common decency just kind of squares it away for me. I just don't think it's right. We look at,
I think there's a lot of lack of remorse in their actions as well.
It does. And I think, we can go into the whole video games, promote violence thing. I don't believe that. I'm a gamer myself. I play video games. But I believe there's a a cultural change that is happening that is making gun ownership harder to justify for younger people. Personal opinion. Like I said, I've got a gun right here. I'm not against guns. I'm not against teaching my children how to use guns. My children know that I have weapons. They know that to respect those. They've all gone out, and we've gone out to the desert and shot rifles. And we've shot together. We're a family that's around that. But I don't believe that there's enough of that culture to support 18-year-olds across the board concealed carrying. I just don't think it is.
The one thing you look at, and let's take up that kid at the protest with the AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
For one, and this is just my opinion, I think that kid's an idiot for going to a protest where he knows there's going to be high tensions with an AR-15 and walking around like he's, Navy SEAL from the block. Like, he was just asking for problems. He was asking for attention, and he was asking for it. Like, that was stupid. Do I think he was defending himself? I mean, I don't know all the facts, but from what I've seen in YouTube videos and things, it looked like he did. Yeah. But so I'm kind of agreeing with you in a way. There's always going to be, and I'm going to say this, there's always going to be stupid people.
Yes.
There's always going to be people doing stupid things. There's always going to be people not mature, but you can't just make a blanket statement and say, hey, because there's 10% stupid people and 90% law-abiding citizens, we need to blanket the law and treat the other 90% like the 10. Am I often left base here, Mitch, with my thinking?
Yeah, and the law eventually prohibits those that are stupid from possessing a firearm. You get charged with ag assault or something like that as a juvenile. That's a prohibitor. Even after you've turned 18, they look at your juvenile record. So, there are some safeguards, Zeke, or Jake. Jake. That is truly redneck, right. But anyway. It's, there's things that balance that out. And geez, I look at our youth, as long as they're off the drugs, as long as they're responsible, I just, like Nick said, you put them in the foxhole with M16s now.
Well, I mean, I like I said, but when we look at some crime statistics, this is one statistic that I did look up prior to this, because I was expecting to kind of go in this direction. One of the things that we have noticed is, I think it's like 66%. I think that's the exact percentage. 66% of school-related mass shootings were conducted by 13 to 17-year-olds.
Well, they can't. They're not supposed to have the weapon anyway.
Exactly. They're not supposed to, and so the fact is that's still within that maturity range. When we start looking at young males, when we start looking at the science that backs that up and where maturity happens in a young male, it's somewhere between the ages of 21 to 25. Now, while I'll agree that things like military service under supervision, I mean, it's hard to fire a round in the military. Tell me I'm wrong, Nick. It's hard to fire a round without having a lot to answer for.
That's true.
And so you have all these rules and regulations that are much more strict than on the civilian side. And so while I agree that service members and things like that, maybe we allow, service members that are 18.
Let's put it into perspective. On a military installation, you have people of all skill levels and of all ranks, of all pedigrees, and guess what? You can't actually conceal carry your own personally owned weapon on a military installation.
There you go.
You can have it in your home.
Yes.
And it has to be registered with the provost marshal.
Yep.
But you can't actually carry it to work. You can't take it to work every day. And you can't walk up to the arms room and sign out your weapon unless you got a permission from someone of subsequent pay grade. So of adequate pay grade. So I get it. And but then you look at what happened on Fort Hood.
Yeah.
Agreed. I mean,
you look at what happened on Fort Hood. You have all these personnel that if they had their weapon, that dude probably would have got one round off and he would have been done.
Agreed. And while I agree with those specific situations,
there you go with the gun-free zone. Yeah,
exactly what you say. So that's kind of funny that one of the only people that carry a weapon on a day-to-day with live ammunition outside of a range of military police, and they're about the most useless organization. So, um,
where do you go when you wash out of any other MOS? MP. Literally, it's the bottom of the barrel. But while it, like I said, though, I think there's something to be said about the about 18-year-olds in the military. I think I do agree with that, and so maybe we allow that statute to be something that we can be presented there, because they're already controlled in such a way. There's so much control going on when it comes to firearms. I know that you can have firearms in off base. There's a lot of people that do that type of situation. There's nothing that says that you can't conceal carry, off base. And so in those situations, maybe we allow, a military personnel to carry at 18. But I
would like for truckers, in this industry, I would like them to have the ability to have their weapon in their truck. I just don't see it ever happening. I see it happening eventually from a legislation standpoint, but I don't see the trucking companies ever budging on their company policies. Not in my lifetime, anyway.
I don't understand that. I truly don't understand that. I mean, that is an absolute, as Mitch said, there are policies and things that they can put in place that absolutely 100% protect.
Well, I think it gets messy, Jake. I think it gets messy because, what if they say 30 out of the lower 48 states are interchangeable permits, right? But the other 20 are not. Well, a trucker, as you know, can cross up to three state lines a day, maybe more, depending on what area of the country they're in. But today they're in New York. 3 days from now, they're in California. How many states along that route that they took does that legislation interchange with? And so let's say a trucking company does say, yeah, you can have your weapon in your truck as long as you don't violate the federal mandate. But along that route, there's 4 states that are violating that federal mandate. So that there's just too many ifs. So I don't see it in my lifetime personally.
Nick?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of the Firearms Owners Protection Act that allows you to be in interstate commerce with a firearm?
I am. I just don't think it covers every state, if I'm not correct.
Well, it should cover every state, but states like New York and New Jersey ignore it.
California and
yeah, well, and that's why they should be extricated from the union. Maybe just have them sawed off the East Coast. Not that I have strong political opinions, but just let them float away. But anyway,
we don't say the C word on this guy.
There should be some teeth to that. We have a bill right now that's in Utah that's where you have political subdivisions that try to violate state law relating to firearms and be overly restrictive. So if you're traveling through the state and you run into a city, that's restricted firearms, they pretty well cut the legs off the Second Amendment. And so we have a law against that, but we didn't have any teeth. We didn't have any penalty. I'll tell you what, if you want to influence trucking companies, make it so that they have to pay if they violate constitutional rights.
Well, but like, I agree with you, but going back to what I said a second ago, that law is, and I'm not a full expert on it. I've read some things and kind of have a basic understanding, but one of the things I do understand is it's not applicable in like 9 states or more, maybe. I can't remember if 9 or 10.
No, it should be, it's federal law. So we do have a supremacy clause, and the
Right.
supremacy clause trumps, for lack of a more appropriate word, trumps state law. So, they should be.
It does, but like you just said, then you get into one state and they're in one city, and then 4 hours later they're in another, and it gets messy. So what coming back to, I think for the trucking companies, it gets just too messy and it puts them at risk too much with the driver. So I don't think in my time we will see it unless there's some extremely aggressive thing that says,
maybe if they hire me for like 1 year and I fix it for them.
There you go.
I would be willing to do that. Make it so that if they're violating rights, it's like your truckers are protected. Mississippi, for example, just gave church security after that. Well, it wasn't just. It was after that shooting in South Carolina in the church, Dylan Roof or whatever his name was.
Mm-hmm.
They just gave church security officers the same rights as law enforcement officers, And, and in Utah, we have the protection that if you're committing a crime, well, if you're burglarizing a truck or trying to assault a trucker, you're committing a crime. If you take away the liability for the trucking companies, that's what they fear.
Yeah,
That's what
it
they
is.
fear. So
They
take
fear the
away the
liability.
liability. Take away the liability by federal statute or state statutes, and then you fix it. And then if you have nationwide concealed carry, they have to recognize your concealed carry permit as you travel from state to state, just like they have to recognize your driver's license. And certainly the privilege to drive does not rise to the level of importance as the right to defend your life. And that's,
Exactly.
the life interest takes priority over a property interest. It takes priority over an employer's property interest or business interest in earning money.
Yeah.
The lives, your life, your employees' lives, all of that takes priority over that freedom.
And I'll tell you, I know a ton of truck drivers, ton of great truck drivers, the guys that are just super performers in the industry. They just like it. And, there's guys that are going to carry anyway, no matter what the policy violation is, no matter what the law is, that they feel they're American citizen, they have the right to protect themselves, but they are putting themselves at risk for termination or even prosecution in certain states, and things of that nature. So it's just that right now, I just think it's so messy and there's not clear guidance. And again, there's nothing out there that takes the liability away from the trucking company.
Well, I teach concealed carry as well. And when you have an employer that does that, I usually just tell my students to tell your boss to take his $750,000 a year job and shove it, like the words of the song, Johnny Paycheck, right?
I mean, there's already a huge turnover in trucking anyway. And so
I'm being facetious.
Yeah,
but.
no, I feel you. But this is actually a good fact to get into. Is there's already a very large turnover in trucking. The average truck driver changes jobs 3 times a year, and that hasn't changed. It's actually only increased over the past year during the pandemic, and it's probably going to change even more over this next year as carriers start shifting pay wages up and down across the board. And so when you're switching jobs 3 times a year and you already have this heavy turnover, you already have this harder time, keeping employees in the first place. I don't think taking away their rights is helping. I think, it might be in the interest of some of the mega carriers to be like, hey, you know what? We're going to respect your Second Amendment right. We just want to make sure that you sign a contract that says that we're not liable on it. We want to make sure that we as a company are not liable on it. And so if you're willing to take that risk on yourself and it's on you, the individual, then you should be able to do that. I think you should be able to take that risk if you so want to. I think it would negate the 41% increase in crimes against truckers that we've seen over the past 24 months. 41% increase in violent crime against truck drivers, whether that be robbery, whether that be shootings, whether that be vandalism, whether that be loss of property, break-ins, whatever those things are. 41% is a very large number. Most criminals are opportunists, and as Mitch has said in the past in this segment, gun-free zones are for opportunists. That's exactly what they're there for. And so if they know that a trucker can't carry a weapon, and the media is blowing it up that, hey, this trucker got shot, they're not allowed to defend themselves, all they can do is have a knife, all they can do is have a bat, blah, 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 blah. What are the opportunists going to do? They're going to go, there's a lot of valuable stuff on that truck. I'm going to go in and take it. Loss of life is not something that reflects on a criminal. I'm sorry, it doesn't.
The lawyers, let me stand up for the lawyers here for these truckers. They can fix this very easily. Because Utah's right to bear arms on the part of school teachers was so strong, the districts wrote a contract and they just said, look, if you're going to carry a gun at school, you've got to agree that you take on the responsibility yourself. But if somebody's in there shooting up a school, and the teacher does away with that person, which is often likely, we have more and more people defending innocents from public shootings. Like we saw one in a church down in Texas not too long ago. if you have the law that Utah has, that person is committing a crime, the victim, that was shot, the criminal, the mass shooter, you're not going to have lawsuits. Now you might, if you're being careless and you hit an innocent person, then you have a problem. But in Utah, some of the school districts are saying if you hurt somebody and there is a lawsuit, you take care of it yourself. We're not responsible. You agree to that.
Right.
From that standpoint, you're an independent contractor, and I think the lawyers could work that out if they really wanted to. But there's really no excuse for truckers having to take that to actually attract violence against themselves because they're sitting in a truck where a lot of criminals know, they learn it in prison, that these truckers are disarmed by their companies.
Right.
That's outrageous.
Well, what about, another full aspect to this and why we possibly are seeing, this 41% increase, because that's a massive increase. 41% is nothing to scoff at, especially when it comes to, crimes against a very specific group of people. If it was against a specific race, we wouldn't be able to hear the end of it, no matter what. But since we're only hearing about a group of blue collar workers, we're not really hearing much about it. But masks are a big take on this too. Everyone's wearing a mask now, and so it's not unusual. It used to be unusual to see someone coming and trying to break into your truck. If they were covering their face, chances are they were trying to break in. Now you're in a more vulnerable situation. You're running into more people in that situation, and it's harder to identify the culprits. That's something that we've also seen, that it's been stuffed by the media, but you can actually see the crime statistics on it, that it's harder to identify criminals during the pandemic right now due to mask laws. It's been harder to identify them because masks are so common. It's harder to identify, harder to track, harder to follow. Even on camera, it's hard to follow them at this point, just because masks are a dime a dozen. You lose that ability to recognize someone, and 50% of the face being gone, it's difficult. And so we've got a mask during the pandemic. We've got everyone wearing masks right now. We've got a 41% increase, and we've got truckers who are already struggling to be treated like decent human beings. I mean, is there a trucker? I mean, should we just reach out to the trucker advocacy groups and say, hey, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. And if you don't, you're probably going to see a mass exodus. I mean,
it's going to, to get something like this passed for DEC, it's going to take a huge backing by the American Trucking Association and groups like that. And especially, I don't know enough about the incoming, or the new, as he is now, DOT secretary, to know that it's even going to get any traction. And certainly
Mr.
that kind
Vanilla
of
ice cream. I can't answer
certainly this amount of legislation is not going to get through the current administration's Congress or even the executive branch. So I just don't see it happening for a long time. Going back to what Mitch said, if we had a Republican Congress and a Republican executive branch and a Senate, possibly, but I don't see right now the American Trucking Association and organizations like that jumping on board with the initiative like this right now.
Do you think it's being stuffed for a reason? Do you think the media is specifically not really covering this as a whole story and covering just tiny specific incidents and spreading them out? Do you think there's something to that?
No, I don't think it's just part of the media's narrative, and they don't care right now. It doesn't matter if it's Fox, CNN, or whatever. The media decides what narrative they want to put out, and I don't think it's what they want to do. And I don't think it's going to be covered.
That's unfortunate.
But you can cover it, Jake.
I will continue to cover it. That's the the problem that we're having here. Like I said, we've only got a few minutes left, and then we'll be jumping off here. But one of the things that I wanted to really address is your book, Mitch, Gun Laws in All, or Self-Defense in All 50 States.
Yeah.
Now that book, it's updated, correct?
I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
I'm on Nevada. That's an interesting place.
Well, I bet
I think they read my last edition.
So
they put in a stand your ground law in Nevada.
So with that being said, this type of book, obviously this is something that everyone should have, that it's a gun advocate, a gun owner. Everyone should have a book like this, especially if there's a person that travels. Now, one of the things that I wanted to address in this is what you say here is you put these cases in plain talk. Now, I love plain talk. That's kind of what this channel is all about, is I kind of dissect what some of these news places or news and news outlets and politicians say, and put it in plain English. Now, with that being said, let's use a state that we don't reside in for an example. Do you know any other state kind of, let's talk about Nevada right now. You said they put in place a stand your ground law. What does a stand your ground law in Nevada look like? What is that law? Plain English.
Well, what it does is expand your home to any place you're legally allowed to be. So as long as you're not trespassing, you don't have to retreat. And this no retreat law or stand your ground law, a lot of people think that Florida was the one that invented it back a few years ago, but it dates back to 1895, where the Supreme Court in a federal case applied stand your ground and said you do not have a duty to retreat. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you didn't escalate or initiate or provoke the conflict, you have a right to stand where you are and defend yourself, and you don't have to get shot in the back during the required retreat, like the policy was in jolly old England. You could only stand your ground in your own home. Well, that's why they call this castle doctrine, because it expands your castle for the purpose of defending yourself to anywhere you have a right to be. So if you're at the supermarket, you're not trespassing, you have a right to stand your ground and defend yourself instead of trying to run away and get shot or stabbed in the back during the required retreat.
Okay. Well,
one liner as to why it's a good legal principle. It protects the innocent, and it raises the risk for those that work robbing people.
fair. And I think that's kind of the premise that we were all bouncing around the entire time. Is there's no risk for criminals right now, especially during certain policies and certain administrations and the way that they look at people. And so I think that crime is, my personal opinion is, I don't think this 41% is going to be going away anytime soon. But as truck drivers, you do have people that are behind you, and you do have people like Mitch that would be glad to help you through those situations when you are in them, if that inevitably happens, and you're in a situation to where you need someone. Here's the guy. Come over and talk to him. Read his book. It is Self-Defense Laws in All 50 States. I actually have that down below in the description, along with Mitch's website, so you can visit that. You can contact him, ask him questions. I believe that he's a great friend of mine. He's also represented me legally before, and I'm very, very happy with the results thus far, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And so take it from me, Mitch is an excellent advocate for this, an excellent resource for this. If there's anything else that anybody wants to add really quickly, we've got about 5 minutes.
Add one thing, talking about plain talk, we have a chapter in the book, and we noticed, we read hundreds and hundreds of cases putting this together, as you can imagine, in every state. And one of the things we kept seeing was, we started to call it thumbs down factors. Things like shooting somebody in the back, or being involved in a racially diverse situation. Those factors, armed defender, unarmed, threatening assailant, but no weapon, just Skittles and iced tea, and a cement sidewalk that that the media didn't want to talk about in the Trayvon Martin case. But so we created a chapter 7, we call it Lucky Chapter 7.
Okay.
And we point out these thumbs down factors. The more of those you have in your case, and you learn to recognize those if you read our book, and it's a plain talk summary of a real case where someone's gotten into trouble, and we feature these thumbs down factors that I've just mentioned. Road rage is another one. If you get into a road rage situation and you end up being the one sticking your gun out the window or shooting at someone, it doesn't matter whether the other guy started it. If there's no paint transfer on your vehicle, you're probably going to get arrested and maybe prosecuted and maybe convicted. So, it's those types of things that we want to teach about, so that our students, our readers, can avoid those types of scenarios. And so it makes it a lot easier because what's reasonable? I mean, you read the law and it says you have to act reasonably. Oh yeah, that's real helpful.
Well, what's reasonable in your perception may be reasonable, it may be completely unreasonable in someone else's perception.
Sure. I
And
mean,
we see that all the
and
time.
then you've got a judge or a jury second guessing you. But when you know that if somebody's threatening you, but they're not showing a weapon, you got a problem. You got a problem. We tell people how to handle that problem in our book.
Well, there you go, guys. Like I said, there you have it. This is Mitch Vilos. Gun knowledge out the wazoo. You got it. You've absolutely got to read the book. It is on sale on his website. I also have that linked down in the description, along with Mitch's personal website for questions, to contact him, etc. Other than that, I think this has been a great discussion on this. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Thank you, Megan, for joining us, even though you just kind of listened and looked pretty there. Listening and look pretty is excellent in some places. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us as well. This was fantastic to have you. We look forward to talking to you again when we have other, gun related questions. I'm sure those will be coming up in the future, especially given the demographic of people that we're talking to. But other than that, thank you all for tuning in for the stream. Once again, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you go and visit Mitch's website. Other than that, that's all I have for you tonight. Keep all 18 on the road and have a good night.
Night.
Thanks, guys.